Snow fell over the ruined town of Eindhoven, turning the broken streets into a quiet white graveyard. The war had stolen everything: warmth, bread, laughter, and replaced it with hunger. In the shell of what used to be a school, dozens of Dutch children huddled together, their cheeks hollow, their eyes glassy. The smallest of them, Anna van Rijn, just 7 years old, clutched a piece of burnt wood like a toy doll. Outside, in the distance, artillery thundered faintly like faraway drums. But here, in this dead winter, the only sound was the whisper of wind through shattered windows. Then came the deep rumble, unfamiliar, powerful, rolling closer. Engines at first. Everyone thought it was German armor returning. Mothers screamed for their children to hide. Men grabbed sticks and pitchforks, as if twigs could fight tanks. But then, from the fog, emerged olive drab trucks and jeeps marked with a white star. American soldiers. One of them jumped down, a tall man with mud-smeared boots and a calm face under his helmet. Corporal James Jimmy O'Connor, 24, from Illinois. He raised his hand and shouted in a voice that cut through the cold, "We're not here to fight. We're here to feed." The Dutch villagers froze. Then, slowly, as the soldiers began unloading crates stamped U.S. Army rations, humanitarian relief, disbelief melted into trembling joy. A woman dropped to her knees. Sobbing. A boy ran forward, whispering, "American." And from the shadows of the ruined school, little Anna peeked out, her thin fingers gripping the doorway. Jimmy noticed her. He smiled softly, knelt, and held out a chocolate bar. "For you, sweetheart." She stared at it like it was gold, her reflection faintly visible in the silver wrapper. Then she took it, bit once, and her eyes filled with tears. That was the moment the Dutch civilians began to cry, not from fear, but from happiness. After years of war, they tasted kindness again. Question for the viewers: if you had nothing left, no food, no warmth, no hope, and a stranger crossed oceans to save your children, could you ever forget that kindness? Before that day, Eindhoven had been starving for months. The German blockade had cut off supplies completely. Potatoes were rarer than gold, bread was made from sawdust, and people boiled tulip bulbs just to survive. Johannes van Rijn, a widowed carpenter and Anna's father, hadn't eaten in 2 days. He spent his nights scavenging ruins for wood to burn, praying his daughter's heartbeat wouldn't slow. He'd long stopped believing in miracles until he saw those trucks. The Americans set up camp beside the collapsed church. The men worked like machines, unloading crates, handing out rations, milk cans, blankets, and tins of meat. The townsfolk, weak and wide-eyed, gathered around them as though seeing angels. Jimmy was everywhere, translating broken phrases, smiling at children, bandaging old men's hands. He had the kind of warmth that made people trust him instantly. His uniform was torn, his gloves patched, but his eyes were alive. When Johannes finally approached him, he bowed slightly and said in his fractured English, "You bring life." Jimmy shook his head. "No, sir. You kept it alive long enough for us to find you." They shook hands, rough, trembling, honest. The soldiers worked deep into the night. Snow turned to freezing rain, and mud rose up under their boots. But they kept unloading until the last crate was empty. Some villagers sang softly, hymns of gratitude that mixed with the hum of engines. Inside the schoolhouse, Jimmy sat with the children, handing out warm soup from a tin pot. Anna sat beside him, her face no longer pale but pink from the heat. She kept staring at his wristwatch, shiny, ticking steadily, the sound of time returning. That he noticed and smiled. "You like it?" She nodded shyly. "Maybe when this is over, I'll get you one too. So you'll always know it's time for hope." She didn't understand every word, but she understood the kindness. When dawn came, American HQ radioed in. The relief convoy had to move north toward Nijmegen. where starvation was even worse. Jimmy's unit, the 101st Quartermaster Company, would leave within hours. They packed up. Johannes ran to him with tears in his eyes. Please, take food, not all. Leave for tomorrow. Jimmy placed a hand on his shoulder. We'll leave enough to last 2 weeks. After that, the Red Cross will come through. I promise. He wasn't sure if the promise was true, but he said it anyway, because sometimes hope was the only rations left. Before leaving, he knelt to Anna again. She handed him a small piece of paper, a drawing of a soldier giving bread to a little girl. For you, she said softly. Jimmy smiled, folded it carefully, and slid it into his breast pocket. I'll keep it with me till the war's over. The convoy engines roared back to life, their sound echoing through the ruined town like the heartbeat of salvation. The children waved until the trucks vanished into the mist. The road to Nijmegen was a frozen nightmare. Bridges bombed, mines everywhere, and snipers hidden in the trees. Jimmy's convoy crawled forward, headlights dimmed, each mile haunted by the sound of distant gunfire. They passed villages where no one was left alive, only dogs and silence. One town had a single sign scrawled in Dutch. We ate the last horse yesterday. Jimmy clenched his jaw. We're too late for some, he murmured at a T1 checkpoint. They found a group of civilians begging for food. Their children were skin and bone. Jimmy tore open his unit's rations and gave away half of what they had. His commanding officer frowned. Corporal, you're disobeying orders. Jimmy replied quietly, Sir, orders don't mean much to an empty stomach. The officer stared at him for a long moment, then said, You've got a good heart, son. Just make sure it doesn't get you killed. Back in Eindhoven, Johannes kept his word. He gathered other men, repaired the collapsed church roof, and turned it into a food shelter. The town began to breathe again, slowly, painfully, but truly alive. Every night, he'd look at the road leading north and whisper, Come back safe. Americanin. Anna still slept with the empty chocolate wrapper under her pillow. Weeks later, deep near the German border, Jimmy's convoy was ambushed near Grosbeek Forest. Mortar shells fell like thunder. Trucks exploded. Men shouted. Jimmy's jeep flipped, throwing him into a ditch. When the smoke cleared, he could hear faint cries, a child's voice. Impossible. Dutch refugees had been following the roads. Desperate to flee the front lines, he crawled toward the sound and found a small boy under debris, clutching a broken toy plane. The boy was Dutch, lost, terrified, maybe 7, like Anna. Jimmy pulled him free, ignoring the blood on his own arm. You're safe now, he whispered, but they were trapped, pinned down by gunfire. His radio was destroyed, and German troops were closing in. For hours, he shielded the boy with his own body, firing when he could, praying for a miracle. When his last bullet was gone, he closed his eyes and waited. Then came the sound, heavy engines again. But this time, they weren't German. Allied tanks burst through the trees, the white star gleaming on their sides. The Germans scattered. The rescuers found Jimmy half-conscious, the boy safe beside him. Wrapped in his jacket, AS medics lifted him. Jimmy whispered one word before blacking out. Eindhoven. When he woke days later in a field hospital, his arm bandaged and lungs aching from smoke, his first question was, Did the Dutch boy make it? A nurse nodded. He's safe. We're sending him back to his family. Jimmy smiled faintly. Then I can rest. But the war wasn't done yet. Word came that parts of the Netherlands were still starving, especially in the north. The hunger winter of 1945. Whole cities like Rotterdam and Amsterdam were dying. Jimmy, still recovering, requested to go. His commanding officer refused. You're wounded, Corporal. Sit this one out. Sir, I didn't come this far to stop feeding people. 2 days later, against orders, he hitched a ride on a supply truck heading north. Meanwhile, in Eindhoven, spring was near. The snow melted, but hunger still lingered. Johannes repaired the schoolhouse windows, turning it into a classroom again. Life crept back one small act at a time. Anna wrote letters she couldn't send, one each week to Mr. Jimmy, telling him about the rebuilt church, the songs they sang, and how she no longer felt cold at night. She placed each letter in a small tin box under her bed, waiting for the day he might return. Jimmy arrived near Amsterdam during the peak of famine. Children fainted in the streets. People ate tulip bulbs and rats. His convoy handed out flour, powdered milk, and chocolate, the same miracle he'd brought to Eindhoven. But one night, he found himself sitting alone under the stars. The drawing Anna had given him still folded in his breast pocket. The paper was faded, but the crayon lines remained. A soldier giving bread to a girl that he smiled, then sighed. If only they knew how much they saved us, too. For the first time in months, he wept. By the war's end in May 1945, the Netherlands was free. American convoys rolled through liberated towns, greeted by cheers, flags, and tears. Jimmy's truck led the final supply line into Eindhoven again. As they crossed the bridge, the townsfolk rushed out. Church bells rang. Children waved tulips. And there, in front of the schoolhouse, stood Anna, taller now, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. Her father beside her. Jimmy jumped off the truck. Anna ran forward, tears streaking her face, and hugged him tightly. He laughed through his own tears, lifting her into the air. "Told you I'd bring hope, didn't I?" The townspeople surrounded them, crying and laughing all at once. Someone started singing the Dutch national hymn, and American soldiers joined softly. Their accents broken but their hearts true. That night, under the rebuilt church roof, they lit candles for all who hadn't lived to see peace. Johannes handed Jimmy a small wooden carving he'd made, of a soldier giving bread to a child. "So you never forget what you gave us," he said. Jimmy looked at the carving for a long time, then whispered, "I'll never forget what you gave me either, reason." But fate still had one more test waiting. The following week, orders came through. Jimmy's unit would be transferred to the Pacific. The war with Japan wasn't over. He stood by the truck at dawn. The Dutch townsfolk gathered to say goodbye again. Anna clung to his hand, refusing to let go. "Will you come back?" she asked. He knelt down, brushed her hair gently, and smiled. "If the world lets me, I will." He handed her his wristwatch, the one she'd always admired. "Now you'll always know what time it is," he said softly. "It's time for hope." As the convoy drove away, the morning sun broke through the clouds, bathing the ruins in gold. The war was ending, but the memory of that kindness would live longer than any empire. And back in the schoolhouse, Anna held the watch to her ear, hearing its steady ticking, not just of time, but of life returning. The sound of the ship's horn echoed across the harbor of Antwerp as Corporal James Jimmy O'Connor stood on deck, his duffel bag slung over his shoulder. The sea was gray and restless. Just like his thoughts, he had left the Dutch town of Eindhoven behind. But the image of Anna, waving with her father in the morning light, haunted him. Her tiny wristwatch, his wristwatch now in her hands, ticked somewhere far away, marking the moments between two worlds, one broken, one trying to heal. "Pacific Theater next," the sergeant said beside him, lighting a cigarette. "They say Okinawa's a bloodbath. You ready for round two?" Jimmy stared into the horizon. "No one's ever ready for war twice." The sergeant exhaled smoke. "You're a soft one, O'Connor. Too much heart for a soldier." Jimmy smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what keeps me human." The ship shuddered as it pulled away from port, carrying hundreds of weary men toward another hell. But for Jimmy, the battle wasn't just across the sea, it was inside him. He had seen starvation, despair, and redemption in the Netherlands. Now he wondered if any mercy remained in this world at all. Weeks later, the troop ship reached Okinawa. The air reeked of salt, mud, and gunpowder. Dead palms leaned like broken crosses, and the sky was never silent. The island was a nightmare of trenches, caves, and fire. Jimmy wasn't a frontline fighter this time. His new orders placed him in supply and relief operations, distributing food and medical aid to civilians trapped in the crossfire. But the faces were different: Japanese, wary, hollow-eyed, and their fear of him was palpable. The irony was not lost on him. He was feeding those who, months ago, his own countrymen had been killing. One afternoon, after hours of digging trenches and hauling crates, Jimmy found a boy scavenging scraps near their camp, maybe 9 years old, thin as a shadow. When the soldiers noticed him, they shouted for him to leave, but the boy didn't move. Jimmy stepped forward and held out a can of beans. The boy hesitated, his eyes darting between the gun belts and helmets. Then, slowly, he reached out, snatched the can, and ran. The soldiers laughed, but Jimmy didn't. He stood there, watching the boy disappear into the hills, remembering Anna's tiny hands clutching chocolate. That night, as he cleaned his boots, a medic named Corporal Lewis sat beside him. "You keep doing that. You'll get court-martialed for feeding the enemy." Jimmy shrugged. "Kids aren't the enemy. Tell that to the brass." Jimmy looked up, his eyes steady. "Maybe one day I will." Days turned to months. The Americans secured the island, but the human cost was unbearable. Jimmy helped bury civilians, mothers, children, farmers, their lives reduced to names no one would remember. When the war finally ended in August 1945, after Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the news didn't bring celebration, just exhaustion. The men drank, cheered half-heartedly, and stared into the sea. Jimmy sat alone near the dock, staring at the stars. For the first time in years, there were no bombs, no screams, no orders. Only silence. He pulled out Anna's drawing from his pocket. The crayon lines smudged and faded, but still clear. A soldier giving bread to a little girl. He traced the edges gently, whispering, "You were the reason I remembered who I was." When he returned to Europe months later, peace felt unreal. The streets of Paris were filled with music and flags. But his heart belonged elsewhere. In a quiet Dutch town he wasn't sure he'd ever see again, he managed to get leave and hitchhiked north through Belgium. Roads once lined with tanks were now filled with bicycles and farmers rebuilding homes. The smell of bread baking for the first time in years followed him like a promise. When he finally reached Eindhoven, the town was alive. Children played by the river, women hung laundry, and men repaired rooftops. Life had returned. Jimmy walked to the schoolhouse, its roof whole, windows glowing with morning light. He smiled faintly. Then he saw Johannes van Rijn, the carpenter, older now but strong. Johannes looked up, dropped his tools, and shouted, "Mr. Jimmy." They embraced like long-lost brothers. "Anna," Johannes called. "Anna, come quickly." From the doorway appeared a young girl, taller, healthy, her hair braided neatly. She blinked in disbelief, then ran toward him with a cry. "Mr. Jimmy." He knelt, laughing, as she hugged him tightly. "I told you I'd come back." "You did." She beamed, holding up her wrist. "It still works." The old watch ticked perfectly, just as it had years before. Johannes brought them inside. The townsfolk gathered, offering bread, cheese, and stories. Laughter filled the room that had once been a shelter. But beneath the joy, Jimmy noticed something. Anna's smile occasionally faltered when she thought no one was watching. There was pain in her eyes, like a shadow that hadn't left. Later that night, as they sat by the fire, Johannes spoke quietly. "She is strong now. But the war, it left something inside all of us. The children still wake in fear when thunder comes." Jimmy nodded. "So do I." Johannes handed him a letter, yellowed with age. "It came months ago. It's for you." Jimmy unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was elegant, in English, from someone he didn't know. "To Corporal James O'Connor, my name is Lieutenant Henry Wallace, United States Army Air Corps. I met a Dutch man named Johannes van Rijn during relief work. He told me of your actions. I was assigned to a mission called Operation Chowhound. Food drops over starving Dutch cities in May 1945. During our final flight over Amsterdam, one of our planes went down. The pilot carried a letter meant for you from a child named Anna. She wanted to thank you for saving her town. The letter was found in the wreckage. I thought you should know she never stopped writing to you. You saved more than lives, Corporal. You saved belief. Asterisk Jimmy's throat tightened. He looked at Anna. You wrote to me? She blushed. I didn't know where to send them. He smiled softly. They still found me. Over the next few days, Jimmy helped Johannes repair homes, deliver wood, and fix doors. The town began calling him the American who stayed behind, that he loved it. The smell of sawdust, the laughter of children, the peace he never thought he'd earn. But soon, news came from the American embassy. Soldiers were being sent home permanently. His time was up. On his last evening, the townspeople gathered in the rebuilt church. The air smelled of wax and tulips. A choir of children sang softly. When it ended, Johannes stood and handed Jimmy a small wooden box. Inside was a silver plate engraved with words in Dutch and English. For the man who brought bread when the world was empty. Jimmy's eyes glistened. I don't deserve this. Johannes smiled. You do. And more. Anna hugged him tightly. You'll come again? He nodded. Someday. But deep down, he wasn't sure if he would. Years passed. Jimmy returned to Illinois, built a small life, a farm, a dog, a quiet existence. The war lived inside him like a ghost, but he learned to live with it. Every spring, he'd take out the drawing Anna gave him and the wooden plaque from Eindhoven that he married. Had no children, but every Christmas he mailed food packages to the Netherlands through the Red Cross, each one labeled for the children. In 1952, while sorting mail, he found an envelope with foreign stamps. It was from Eindhoven. Inside, a photograph, the town square, rebuilt alive. In the center stood Anna and Johannes, smiling beside a new bakery. The note read, Dear Mr. Jimmy, the bread you brought us once saved our lives. Now we bake bread for everyone. Father says we feed the world the way you fed us. If you ever come back, there will always be a place at our table. Jimmy pressed the photo to his heart and whispered, Guess I did come back, just in a different way. He didn't know that far away. In that same bakery, Anna looked at her old watch every morning, hearing its tick, not of time, but of gratitude. But peace never stays quiet forever. In the spring of 1954, heavy rain flooded parts of the Netherlands. The rivers overflowed, destroying villages. Thousands were left homeless again. The American relief effort began once more. When Jimmy read the news, he knew what he had to do. He was older now, slower, but his heart had never changed. He wrote to the Red Cross offering to volunteer. Within weeks, he was on a cargo plane bound for Amsterdam. Back to the land that had changed him forever. As the plane descended, the city stretched below, not gray and broken this time, but shining, rebuilt, alive. At the airport, aid workers greeted him. One of them handed him a clipboard. Mr. O'Connor, we've assigned you to the southern region, Eindhoven. He smiled. Of course. The road to Eindhoven was lined with flowers and flags. The people remembered. When he reached the town, he found the bakery first. Its sign read, Van Rijn and Daughter, Bread of Hope. He stepped inside. The smell of warm loaves filled the air. Behind the counter stood a young woman, flour on her apron, her face familiar. She turned and froze. Then her lips parted in shock. Mr. Jimmy? He laughed softly. You grew up. Anna ran around the counter and hugged him, tears streaming down her face. You came back. He held her close. Told you I would. Johannes appeared from the back room, gray-haired now, but still strong. They embraced again like family long separated by oceans. The townsfolk gathered quickly, word spreading. The American has returned. Children who had been babies during the war now lined the streets to see him. Some called him Uncle Jimmy. That evening, the church bells rang as the townspeople held a feast. Bread, cheese, laughter, and music filled the square. No speeches, no pomp, just gratitude that as the night deepened. Anna sat beside him under the stars. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly that he looked at her. "The war." She nodded that he thought for a long moment. "I regret what it took from people, but I don't regret what it taught me. That kindness can survive anything." She smiled. "You taught us that." He looked around at the faces, the music, the light. "No, Anna, you taught me." When the night ended, he walked to the riverbank where he had first seen starving villagers years ago. He knelt, touched the water, and whispered, "We made it." Behind him, the church bells rang again, carrying across the town, not as an alarm this time, but as a hymn of peace. And as the river shimmered under the moonlight, he heard the faint ticking of a watch somewhere nearby, reminding him that even time itself could heal. By the spring of 1955, the war was a decade behind them, but its shadow still lingered in small, invisible ways in Eindhoven. Laughter filled the streets where tanks once rolled. Children ran barefoot through the square, chasing pigeons, their voices echoing between the rebuilt houses. The town smelled of bread again, real bread, warm and sweet, rising from Van Rijn and Daughter Bakery. Inside, Anna van Rijn kneaded dough with practiced hands, humming softly. Sunlight streamed through the shop windows, catching the tiny silver watch on her wrist, the same one Corporal James Jimmy O'Connor had given her years before. It still ticked perfectly, its quiet rhythm a heartbeat of memory. Jimmy sat by the counter, his uniform replaced by a plain brown jacket. His hair was streaked with gray now, his face lined, but his smile still carried the same warmth that had once fed a starving town. He took a sip of coffee and said with a grin, "You make better bread than the army ever did." Anna laughed. "That's not difficult, Mr. Jimmy. The army made everything taste like cardboard." The doorbell jingled as customers came and went, each greeting him warmly. In Eindhoven, the American soldier had become something of a legend, the man who brought life back. But to Jimmy, he was just a man who had done what his heart told him. Johannes entered, wiping flour from his beard. "Mr. Jimmy," he said proudly, "today, the mayor is coming to see you." Jimmy blinked. "Me? What for?" Johannes smiled. "To thank you, officially, on behalf of the town." That afternoon, the town square filled with people. Flags fluttered, children waved tulips, and the mayor, wearing a black coat and gold chain, stepped onto a small platform. He spoke in Dutch first, then in careful English. 10 years ago, we were dying. The Americans came not as conquerors, but as brothers. They gave us bread when we had none, and kindness when we had lost faith. One of those men returned, not for glory, but for love. Today we honor Corporal James O'Connor, whose compassion fed not only our stomachs, but our souls. Applause broke out, thunderous and genuine. Jimmy's eyes shone as children surrounded him, placing garlands of tulips around his neck. The mayor handed him a small medal engraved with both Dutch and American flags. "This medal," he said, "is not for battle, but for mercy." Jimmy held it for a moment, overwhelmed. He had fought for his country, but this was what made it worth it. He whispered to himself, "I didn't save them. They saved me." That night, the town celebrated. Lanterns lit the streets, violins played, and people danced. Jimmy sat quietly near the fountain, watching the joy around him. Anna joined him, her hair tied back, her dress simple but elegant. She carried 2 glasses of apple cider. "Cheers," she said, handing him one. "To what?" he asked. "To peace." They clinked glasses, and for a long moment neither spoke. The night was warm, filled with laughter and music, but Jimmy's gaze lingered on the stars above. Anna noticed. "You're thinking about them again, aren't you?" He nodded slowly. "The ones who didn't make it. The ones who never came home." She placed her hand gently over his. You carry them with you. That's enough. He looked at her, smiling softly. You sound wiser than me. She shrugged playfully. I grew up in a war. It teaches you fast. They both laughed, but behind their smiles, there was an unspoken understanding that even peace had its ghost in the following weeks. Jimmy helped the town rebuild one final project, a small memorial at the edge of the square. It was a stone statue of a soldier kneeling to give bread to a child. At its base, a plaque read, "For those who fed the hungry and restored our faith in humanity." 1945. When it was unveiled, the townspeople wept. Mothers placed flowers. Children traced their fingers over the engraved words. Jimmy stood quietly beside Anna and Johannes. I don't deserve a statue, he said. Johannes chuckled. Then think of it as a statue for everyone who helped you. You just happened to be the one who stayed. Months later, Jimmy received a letter from the U.S. Embassy. It was an offer, a position with the United Nations Relief Administration, helping coordinate food aid in post-war Europe. They wanted him to travel again, to Germany, to Italy, to anywhere people still starved. He hesitated. Eindhoven had become home, but his heart was built for service. That evening, he sat by the river where he had once knelt during the liberation. Anna found him there, skipping stones across the water that he showed her the letter. They want me to go back to work. Different uniform, same mission. Her smile faded slightly. Will you go? He sighed. I don't know. I finally found peace here. But maybe peace isn't meant to be kept. Maybe it's meant to be shared. She was quiet for a moment, then said softly, If you go, promise me one thing. What's that? That you'll come back again, not for duty, but for you. He smiled. You have my word. Jimmy accepted the position. Over the next few years, he traveled across Europe, helping rebuild orphanages, delivering food to war widows, and teaching young volunteers how to treat civilians with dignity. Wherever he went, he carried one thing, the wooden plaque from Eindhoven that read, For the man who brought bread when the world was empty. It reminded him that every loaf he delivered wasn't just food. It was hope reborn. That he sent letters to Anna often, filled with stories of towns healing, children laughing, and farms blooming again. She wrote back faithfully, her handwriting growing neater with each year. Her letters always ended with the same line. The bread still rises, Mr. Jimmy. By 1960, Jimmy was back in Illinois, older, slower, his hair completely gray. Yet every spring, he received a package from the Netherlands, tulip bulbs, wrapped with a note. Plant them and think of us. He did. His farm became a sea of color each April. Neighbors called it the Dutch field. Then, one winter, as snow fell softly outside, a telegram arrived. It was from Eindhoven. Johannes van Rijn had passed away peacefully at age 70. His final words, according to Anna's message, were, Tell the American thank you. Tell him he gave my child her future. Jimmy sat by the fire for a long time, staring at the flames. He whispered, Rest easy, old friend. He booked a ship ticket the next month. He had to see Eindhoven one last time. When he arrived, the town was brighter than ever. Paved streets, new homes, bustling shops. But the bakery still stood in its same corner, its sign proudly reading Van Rijn and daughter. Anna, now a grown woman in her 30s, ran the place with a quiet strength that reminded him of her father. When she saw him at the door, she smiled through tears. You kept your promise, she said. I had to. He replied softly. They visited the cemetery together, laying tulips on Johannes's grave. Then they walked to the old memorial in the square. The bronze soldier still knelt, frozen in time. Children played around it, laughing, unaware of what it once meant. Jimmy smiled. That's how it should be, he said. They shouldn't have to remember hunger. Anna nodded. They'll remember kindness instead. They sat together for hours, talking about everything and nothing. The war, the bakery, the world changing around them. When the sun began to set, painting the town in gold, Anna looked at him and said, "Mr. Jimmy, you know, sometimes I think the watch you gave me doesn't just keep time, it keeps faith." He laughed softly. "Then don't ever stop winding it." That night, as the church bells tolled, Jimmy stood on the balcony of his small hotel room, looking out at the sleeping town. The wind carried the scent of bread and tulips, and he thought of how far they had all come, from starvation to abundance. From fear to laughter, he took the medal the mayor had given him years ago and placed it on the windowsill. "This belongs here," he murmured. Then he looked at the sky and whispered, "If there's any justice in heaven, I hope they have bakeries." He chuckled quietly and went to bed, his heart light for the first time in decades. In the morning, the maid found him peacefully asleep, his hands folded over a photograph. Anna as a child holding a chocolate bar, the first one she ever tasted. News of his passing spread quickly through Eindhoven. The church bells rang for him, and the townsfolk gathered to honor their friend one last time. Anna stood at the memorial, tears streaming down her cheeks, the old wristwatch ticking softly in her palm. The mayor placed a new plaque beside the old one. It read, "James O'Connor, the American who fed our hope. 1918, 1961. Every year after that, on Liberation Day, the townspeople placed loaves of bread at the base of the statue. Children were told the story of the soldier who had come not to fight, but to feed, and when asked why they did it, Anna would always say, "Because once, when the world was starving, one man remembered to share." Decades later, in a modern Eindhoven alive with color and peace, a little museum stands beside the town square. Behind glass sits a small silver wristwatch, still ticking, next to a faded drawing of a soldier giving bread to a girl. The plaque below reads, "This watch belonged to the child Anna van Rijn, and this drawing was given to Corporal James O'Connor in 1945. Their story reminds us that mercy can outlive war. And if you stand quietly in that room, you might swear you can hear faintly, over the hum of time, the echo of church bells, laughter, and the heartbeat of a soldier who believed that feeding one hungry child could change the world."